Please welcome Myq Kaplan.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here. I appreciate your coming out. I am 33 years old, which is, the age at which what would Jesus do stops being applicable, pretty much. There is nothing more he can teach me. A couple months ago, somebody wished me a happy Easter, and I was like, oh, I'm actually Jewish. We don't believe in happiness, so thanks. But no thanks. Great. I feel like you guys are gonna be my demographic, which is people who know the word demographic. So good start. If you don't, find somebody who chuckled on that one. They can be your teammate throughout the rest of this. I don't want you to think, I don't think I'm better than anyone. I do not think that I am better than anyone, except for people who say things like, what, do you think you're better than me? Those are the only people that I do think I'm better than. Mainly at grammar, because it's better than I. Technically, it's what do you think? Are you better than I am? I'm not here to make friends, I guess is the point. Where are my English majors at? Don't answer, ends with a preposition. It was a trick. It was a trick, everybody. Nobody fell for it. Good work. I don't mean to be like a grammar bully, everybody. Like, at whom are you looking? That's a grammar bully. At whom are you looking? My grandmother was an English teacher. She would always correct me on rules growing up so much that I called her grammar. And then she would say it's pronounced grandmother, and I'm like, I'm trying to make a joke here, grammar, please, would you roll along with this? Like, she would correct me on rules that didn't even exist anymore because she was born old a long time ago, you know? Language changes over time. She's like, remember, Michael, thy before thee, except after ye. I'm like, those aren't words at all anymore. I don't know what you're talking about. Here's a real conversation we had when I was a kid. I said, Grandma, this is really fun. She said, no, it is much fun, or lots of fun, because fun is a noun that cannot be modified with an adverb. I was like, never mind, not fun anymore. This was not many fun's grammar. So, my other grandmother, I have two. One is living, one is not, so I have a matching set of grandmothers. And just want to relate to everybody here, because everyone here has two grandmothers, if you count living ones and non-living ones. Unless you have lesbian grandmothers, then maybe you could have more than two. So everyone here has at least two grandmothers, up to four. Maybe more if they're polyamorous, in addition to lesbian. So everyone has 2 to 4-ish grandmothers. Unless you're the product of incest, then maybe you only have one. Sorry, this joke is not for you. So, also sorry in general, I guess. Unless you're the product of incest and lesbian grandmothers, then you're back up to 2. So welcome again to the joke. Oh, thank you. I appreciate the applause for either math or incest. Not sure which. Fine either way. My grandmother, who is living, believes that I am good looking, not just because of cataracts, also love. And the way she tells me I'm good looking is she'll say things like, Michael, if I were your age, I would be chasing you down the halls. To which I would always want to say things like, you mean if you were my age and also not related to me? Is that the less weird way to get that message across? Because I don't want the only reason that this isn't happening to be some sort of sci-fi technicality. Okay.
This is your host, Myq, and we're going to be exploring the lives of people who discovered their true path and are living very unique lives because of it. Not only are we going to be learning about the very interesting things that they're doing, but also learn how they broke from the mold and decided to take the adventure of living their own lives. Feel free to visit my Substack at Myq, that's MEEOK.substack.com, for a convenient list of links to all of the things discussed during our chat. And to learn more about my journey and services, please visit HoldingCompassionate.space. In a week when we can all probably use some laughs, I have brought on one of my favorite comics and friends, Myq Kaplan, who has been doing comedy for several decades. He is not only funny, but also very clever, very thoughtful, and also a very kind human being. He and I have seen each other through quite a few incarnations, including me as a stand-up long ago. And in this conversation, we talk about all the things. We talk about how to be a good ally and how to come into compassion for each other. He shares about the path with Buddhism and different sacred medicines and how that has really informed not only his personal life, but also comedy. I'm so glad to have you for this fun and uplifting and also very heartfelt conversation between my very dear friend and me. You can follow him at Myq, that's MYQ, Kaplan, Kaplan, like the test, .substack.com, as well as myqkaplan.com for his website. Many, if not all, of his albums are available for free on YouTube. I have those in the links, as well as the many things that we reference in this really fun and interesting and educational conversation. I always learn a lot from Myq, and I hope he feels the same. Things will be a little bit bumpy over the next few weeks because I am moving out of the country. Good timing. Although I'm not moving to flee the US, as I think some people might be feeling right now, I'm actually leaving to go somewhere that I've been called to that's very exciting, Oaxaca, Mexico. So I will try to get out as much as I can during that time, but I also need to self-care. Yeah! So please bear with me. I will definitely be sharing elements of my very exciting move. It's a very hard-won reward for the last 15 years of work that I've been doing, and I'm so very, very excited. Thanks so much, and please feel free to leave your comments, and please do take very good care of yourself. Take the space that you need, set the boundaries that your body is asking for, that your spirit's asking for, and know that beneath it all, there are people who can support you. And of course, I am a life coach and a sacred medicine integrationist, and you could always hit me up for a session if you need it. Without further ado, here's Myq. So thanks for coming on, Myq.
Of course, I love talking to you.
I know. We've known each other for, I think, technically ever.
Yes, and in these incarnations, it's got to be coming close to 20 years, or certainly 15-ish. I don't even know. What do you think?
So we met back in the days of the Comedy Studio in Harvard Square.
Which is returning to Cambridge next month.
Wow, awesome.
I'll be one of the first shows back.
No way.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming. But yeah, that was my comedy womb. It is the first comedy venue I ever performed at. It was my comedy home for a long time. And yeah, I met a lot of dear friends there, including, spoiler alert, you.
I think it's the first comedy home for a lot of big comics. I mean, it's such a special place, and it's kind of hard to describe. It's on the third floor of a building in Harvard Square with a Chinese restaurant below. And it really just kind of nurtures young comics, but also some seasoned comics. And a lot of people do get their starts there. And Rick knows a lot of big people, and they come in, and then celebrities come to see them. And so it's like you can have really interesting nights there.
It's true, and here are a couple of tweaks. So they're going to be in a new location, but that is, yes, where they were for many years. And Rick will sadly not have as large a role moving forward, but I am ever grateful. I've been doing comedy for more than 20 years, and it began there. And so without the Comedy Studio, I do not know what my life would be, because it wasn't that way. It only is this way.
Well, and you're someone who really did the work too. You were not a prima donna. You certainly had a lot of talent. I mean, some people, you don't see the talent right away. And then years later, through hard work, you're like, wow, that person got really funny. But I feel like you kind of just shot out of the barrel. Like you came out with strong writing, good jokes, and you could perform. When you're starting out, you're not selling out theaters, I used to do your show at an ice cream shop where people were not there to see comedy.
Oh yeah, I loved doing that. Like first of all, thank you for your kind words. I will also I'm not going to argue with you on every item that you bring up that is rosier than my own memory is I did have some jokes and I felt like I was coming out strong, but a joke that I tell sometimes is like a year into comedy I looked back at the original my tapes from my first performances and I thought, "Oh boy, that wasn't good." But thank God I'm good now, 1 year in. And then another year later, I look back on those tapes and be like, "Oh boy, oh that was no good." But thank God I'm good now. And every year since then, I have looked back and be like, "Well, thank God, whew, we're really making progress every year. I think I'm doing great." But yeah, I loved doing that show at it was I think a now defunct, no longer there ice cream shop called Harold's. It was another comedian. It's so funny. I think it was Shane Webb.
Oh, I love her. She was so funny.
She was a real special being, and she was hosting a show at this ice cream shop, and I did it once, and I was like, this is a lot of fun. And she was basically like, do you want to take it over? Because she's like, I'd rather perform in a bar. And I was like, obviously, there's wonderful shows in bars, and there's wonderful shows at all kinds of alternate weird venues. But I loved that sometimes you do a show in a bar, and people don't know that there's a comedy show and people are drinking and they're not happy that you're doing the show. And at an ice cream shop, if they didn't know you were doing a show, they didn't drunkenly yell. They just were quietly irked on their laptops or whatever they were doing. And so I felt like it was another, I guess the theme is another, if not a welcoming place, a place that didn't shoo you away. When you're starting out in comedy, all you want is places to perform that can I come here? I can come. Yes. An ice cream shop. Surely. I say, yeah, there was no hard ass type A personality running the ice cream shop comedy community. So yeah, I love doing it there.
I mean, it's a totally different vibe, right? Because you don't have people who are like, well, I wish this person would shut up. I'm trying to get drunk and laid here. The ice cream shop was more like, I'm on a G-rated date and I'm taking this girl out for ice cream and wow, and there's a cute little comedy show happening here. How quaint, very different vibe.
I just realized I just did probably hadn't performed in an ice cream shop for maybe decades, but I was in Pittsburgh a few months ago. I don't know if you're familiar with the rising don't tell comedy phenomenon or empire, but their main thing is that in many different cities, they produce shows, and the way it works is you find out the day that the show is, you get the day and the time, and the general neighborhood, but you don't know anything else about it. You don't know exactly the venue. You don't know exactly the comedians. So you're just like, oh, we're going to go out and have a fun surprise of whatever it is. Then the day of the show, you get the information of where to go. And then you see the show. And then later they're like, that's who the comedians were. And so I've done a bunch of these. And so sometimes I pass through Pittsburgh pretty often. And so the folks who run the Don't Tell shows there, I did one, and it was in an ice cream shop. And it's nice because in this particular venue, the front of the ice cream shop was just doing business as usual, and just in the back, they set up, I don't know, 30 chairs, and people were there because they wanted to be at a weird mystery show that turned out to be at an ice cream shop.
I love surprise stuff. There used to be a thing in Boston called Gorilla Queer Bar. And it's where, you'd be on this mailing list and the day of, they would be like, hey, does everybody know this straight bar? Well, all the gays are going there tonight. And we would just crash these dive bars in Boston. Sometimes they were big bars, and the businesses were happy. They were like, wow, this was going to be kind of a dead Tuesday. And instead we've got a ton of business. And, and it was just really funny because we would show up to some of these dive bars and it's just these old Irish guys trying to catch a game or something. And they're kind of like, what is going on? It's kind of like the pilot episode of It's Always Sunny or something.
The guys hired you to promote their bar and you turned it into a gay bar. They're not happy.
So much money! Oh, so much money!
But it was, I don't know. I think there's something really great about surprises.
Are you two seeing this? Boys are out tonight, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of surprise is wonderful. It seems very akin to the don't tell comedy idea where people are, at least in your situation, everyone is opting in to be a part of the surprise other than, the few random people that might be. But it's nice that it's helpful to the venue and it's cool for the community. Man, I love it.
So we started off in a Harvard Square comedy scene and still know quite a few of those people, Aaron Judge, and I think Barron would kind of stop in from New York from time to time. It was always a
absolutely.
Big, like, ooh, Barron's coming. But you kept with it. I did it for like 6 months and I have like a decent recorded set. I'll probably plop some jokes in here.
It's great to be at Harvard Square tonight. It's always been a dream of mine to someday go to Harvard and be the very first Asian ever to drop out.
Yeah, you really kept with it. And stand-up is really a terrifying thought for most people.
Yes, I think that Seinfeld, like his bit about it is like I don't know what I want to call it, but just like the archetype, the prototype, like of this concept, his joke of the number one fear for people is public speaking. The number two fear is death. So if you're at a funeral, most people would rather be in the coffin than delivering the eulogy. Like, it's such an interesting thing because that's not my personal experience. I am not afraid to speak publicly. Maybe I should be more afraid, And I mean, that's kind of a microcosm or like a nutshell of my entire career that I'm like, this is what I think. That's not what you think? Oh, okay. Other people do things real different? Oh, well, let me tell you my way. And then, along the way, finding other like fellow weirdos, which I think everyone is weird. I think everyone has some capacity. Like there's obviously a spectrum and there's various spectrums. And there are ways that some people are like more normative than others, even in their heart and soul. Like somebody's like, I really just love white bread or whatever,
This sounds like a preamble for you to delivering some bad information to me. Like,
no.
So everyone's a little weird. It's totally fine. I think this is true.
I mean, here's the thing is, I was thinking about this when you said, I love a surprise. And you know what I also love in addition to a surprise is not being surprised, like having all the information. For example, my girlfriend, Rini, who I've been with just over 8 years now, she had seen my comedy before. We had actually met a couple times that I didn't remember after shows, but we talked for several hours on this particular night. And it was definitely like I came over to her. She was like with a friend of mine. And I was like, oh, who's your friend? And she was like, I was actually interested in meeting you and talking to you. And I was like, wow, this is like the beautiful lady wants to talk to me. This is amazing. And then I found out, that her outer beauty matched her inner beauty. And we just talked for hours. And there was, a vibe. And so at one point in our relationship origin story, we were just having a really lovely, occasionally like flirty conversation that made me feel comfortable. Like, I put my hand on her arm at one point, and then I said, like, just want to let you know, I'm putting my hand on your arm because I thought that would be a reasonable thing to do that we would both enjoy.
Wow,
and
this is hot stuff.
I'm so sorry if you need to put like a content warning on this. Please, there's going to be not safe.
This is not the Dan Savage sex podcast, Mike. This is
okay, well that's as hot as it's gonna get, unless you. Oh no, I just have to to button it off, she said, I'm aware that your hand is there, and I'm glad that it's there. It feels good. You were absolutely right that it would be a fine and reasonable thing. And here's the thing. Since the pandemic began, Rini did a lot of reading and essentially self-diagnosed with being on the autism spectrum. And, it sort of opened up lots of doors and ideas and reframings of her childhood and the way that she is now. And there are many different ways that it can manifest for people. One of the ways that seems like helpful for us is, and I also neither of us have received like a specific diagnosis, but also I'm like, yeah, I mean, the question makes sense to ask. Like, am I on the spectrum somewhere? Probably. Is it useful? The point is, we both really appreciate things being spelled out literally. And that's something that is often helpful to people who, that could be helpful to everyone at some point. And in the neurotypical community, there are often times when people are like, I'll pick it up by context. Like, I got it. You don't have to spell it out exactly. And sometimes we're like, if you don't mind, I'd love for it to be spelled out exactly, whether it's something that I'm experiencing or expressing or something that I'd like to receive.
So what you're saying is that you are a biblical enthusiast.
I
love the literalness of how it's just spelled out there.
I mean, yeah, I think everything other than biblical, I agree. Yes, 100%.
I tend to think of autism actually similar to narcissism, where we're all on the spectrum, but not all of us are like diagnosably autistic or narcissists. I feel like we all kind of have elements.
That makes a lot of sense. Whereas people who are narcissists, if you're further along the narcissistic spectrum, I think the less likely you are to seek a diagnosis. The more that you could use a diagnosis or that it could be helpful for you on the autism spectrum, then hopefully the more likely you are to want to seek that.
Yeah. Like a lot of my friends with like siblings with severe autism, they figure it out really late in life because it just didn't really occur to them earlier to be like, is there something different?
Yeah. Well, it seems like the knowledge of the autism spectrum is constantly expanding and progressing and moving, through society more than it ever has before.
It's really, really hot.
It's having a moment. Yeah. And so that's great that, of course, there's tons of people. It's not that there's just what is causing all the autism. Oh, awareness of autism is certainly helping people learn who might otherwise not have had the concept for it. My friend Gus is a therapist and was telling me once that he and some fellow therapists were discussing cases, and somebody was describing the symptoms that a person was experiencing, and Gus noted like one of his colleagues was looking kind of intently and maybe confused in a way, like, wow, what could all these symptoms be? Like, what is it going to be? And then at the very end, they're like, so we then diagnosed, because of the symptoms, this thing. And then the person was like, oh, yes, of course, that thing. And it's funny because the diagnosis is often just like a conglomeration of symptoms is like, that's what a constellation is. A bunch of stars. You're like, oh, there's a star, and there's a star, and oh, it's a bear. Okay. But it's still, it's a bunch of stars. And if it's helpful to have the title of the constellation, then have at it.
Yeah. I mean, we're all kind of on a spectrum of everything, sexuality, all that kind of stuff is on a spectrum, and language is on a spectrum. Like I think about how I met a Catalonian when I was in Berlin studying German long ago. And I was like, what even is that? And, they described it as, oh, well, our language is somewhere in between Italian and Spanish. And I was like, oh, so it's kind of like Dutch, how that's like somewhere between German and like a Nordic language. And I thought, well, why is that the in between? Do you know what I mean? And it's because it's just a smaller population. And
yes.
And so one of my favorite poets, not one of my favorite poets, but one of my favorite poetry essayists Poets write amazing essays, even if I'm not into their, like
Mhm.
Lorca wrote an amazing essay, but I'm not a big fan of his poetry. Anyway, but Mary Rufus said something really profound. She said something like that stars are, she said like, I'm gonna fuck it up. I'm gonna fuck it up. Um, well, she talked about how constellations are our first stories, and
Ah.
and the moon was the first poem. And when you learn about constellations, just like when you learn about colors, when you find that it's not this like static thing, that different cultures, like some cultures only have three colors, right?
Oh yes, or words for those colors.
Yeah, exactly. And or just three colors, they'll group brown with purple or something. Like that's just kind of how they organize it in their minds. And we do that with language. And so I feel like it is important to name things, but we want like a lot of certainty. But it's like, yeah, we see the Orion because people taught us to see the Orion. But actually, it's just a collection of stars. Thanks for listening to the free part of our conversation. To listen to the rest, become a paid subscriber over at my Substack at Myq, that's MEEOK, .substack.com. See you there.